Hey everyone, so good morning again. Thank you for joining us at the second HR Chamber Council. Today we've got a really interesting session planned, more of a HR topic roundtable. So we hope and expect you to be participating in this. If you have questions, comments, please feel free to put those in the chat. Unmute yourself if we ask questions, if you don't ask a question as well. So before we get started though, we do have Meg Huizinga with Knowles and Sullivan joining us here today. Knowles and Sullivan is the sponsor of the 2021 HR Chamber Councils. So Meg, if you want to take it away really quick. Mike, if you'll unmute your microphone over there.
Yes, so I'm Megan Huizinga with Knowles and Sullivan. We're proud to sponsor this series. Today, we're happy to have Mike Perkins with Frontline HR to kind of talk about some topics that are relevant to the issues we're facing today, and maybe answer some questions if anybody here or calling in just has a burning issue that they wanted to discuss with a professional. And we hope to continue this series again with a couple more speakers in the future, so come back.
All right, well thanks Meg, thank you guys for sponsoring. Thanks Knowles and Sullivan for sponsoring this HR Roundtable. You know, we would really like to have a really active local HR community, and I know that we have some people that belong to SHRM chapters in Anniston and up in the Marshall County area, and there's not one here. So the Chamber's been good enough to have an HR forum, HR council, and good sponsors like Knowles and Sullivan that sponsor this forum. And so, you know, we really encourage you as HR professionals to participate in as many opportunities as the Chamber provides, and also if you you know, if you have suggestions for programs or things that you would really like to learn more about, then we certainly encourage that. We have people here at the table as well, and so we'll talk about as many things and as in-depth, I guess, as you all want to. We'll suggested some topics, and I threw in a few things, and so, you know, right now I think it's pretty clear to me, anyway, in my travels around the country and talking to different HR professionals, that the biggest issue facing HR right now is finding and keeping people that want to show up for work and that will, you know, stay committed to work. I just read a story last night where a company asked all of their employees who had been sent out to work remote during COVID, you know, how many are willing to come back to the office, and out of like several hundred, I think 3 said we want to come back. So people have also become quite spoiled. A lot of people have in remote work, and for some entities that seems to work really well, and for others it doesn't. But you know, I would love for us to spend a little time on the whole issue of finding and keeping employees, because I really do think that I consider it a crisis right now as I go around and just talk to people. I mean, you walk in restaurants and they can't keep up, you know, they cut off half of their serving area because they can't get employees. But I'll just ask you all, is there anything that you see as kind of a burning issue that you came here today or dialed in that you would like to talk a little about, or that you would like some more information about? Is anything that maybe I haven't mentioned that stands out for you?
One thing you mentioned about just getting employees in, or getting that, you know, hiring the top talent, but it's retaining top talent. I've spoken on this before, and it's a very hot topic. 50% of the population that is working today is looking for their next opportunity, because if they're not happy, they're just going to leave, and then that investment is 3 times the cost of the initial hire. So that cost itself is another aspect of that.
No, that's a great point. Dale Dunn, introduce, when you speak up, if you don't mind, just introduce yourself and tell who you're with, and that's helpful. But yes, we'll talk about that for sure.
Okay.
Go ahead and introduce yourself.
My name is Dale Dunn, and I am a business coach and a business consultant in the area here. And my company is Strategic Orchestration. I base my work around music, not sports, but it is around business.
Good for you. Yeah. Anything else? Any other topics that you guys would like to talk about in more detail, or if one of those topics really stand out for you?
So I'm Allison Casey. I'm with Gadsden Regional. yes, we are having a really hard time keeping employees, but we're having an even harder time keeping leadership. So if you don't have leadership of the departments and of the people, then it's very hard to keep the people that are working. So we've seen a mass exodus of leadership in leadership positions, but we're hiring back in, but then it takes quite a while to grow that talent to retain the employees.
Yeah,
So that's
So let's talk about the whole retention issue or the attraction issue. You know, let's talk first about hiring in general, and just I'd like to get a little feedback from you as to, you know, whether hiring is a real problem for your company right now or your entity, and what are the challenges that you're primarily seeing there?
I'm Heidi Darbo. I'm with the American Heart Association.
Okay.
And I think something I've seen, because I work with a lot of companies, a lot of CEOs, is company engagement. And that's kind of where I meet the need sometimes, or try to. But I've seen a lot of ERGs kind of coming out of this, the employee resource groups, and use some tools that we have or other people have to kind of bring people together as a community, whether it be for us, again, it might be Heart Walk or our wellness tools, but we do a worksite wellness summit in my other market, and there's a thirst for these kind of tools.
And those are great retention tools, because
Yes.
the more you engage and involve your employees, obviously, in different work-related activities, community outreach, even internal projects and committees, the more engaged they are, the little bit better hook that you get into employees, and maybe a little bit more likely to stay. What about on the online there, some of the hiring challenges that you guys are seeing right now? Yeah. So, Lauren, tell a little bit about your business and what kind of the areas that you're struggling to find people in. Yeah, and I hear that more and more right now. And, you know, I was in a restaurant in Birmingham recently, and the manager said that they had 35 confirmed interviews set up for just, you know, restaurant server and counter jobs, and one person showed up at the interview, which was just mind-boggling to me. I mean, these were confirmed interviews, you know, and not just, you know, people that had applied. These were people that had been confirmed for interviews. Are other people having that kind of experience? I mean, really that much of a no-show for interviews and just showing up for work? You're seeing that at the hospital?
We're seeing that at the hospital, even in professional positions. You know, RNs will ghost us, or we will call and make offers, and we will never hear back from them.
We continue to hear stories about ghosting and all that, and I don't know what the answer is. I mean, has anybody found any ways to try to maybe increase the amount of, I guess, the percentage of people that actually show up? I mean, any techniques that you've used that have been effective to actually force people, or not force people, but maybe go to them or whatever, or maybe even able to identify why people are ghosting your business as opposed to others? Has anybody kind of had any aha moments there where they've discovered anything that might be helpful? Or is it?
One thing that we have really worked on is getting our hiring managers and directors involved in that initial conversation. So what we prefer for them to do, not necessarily what they do, but what we have coached the interviewers to do, whether it be a manager or a director, is once the interview is scheduled, to text the person and say, hey, I'm looking forward to meeting you. Let me know if you need to change the schedule, or let me know if you have any issues with meeting that time. And then once we do offer positions, then the director is the one that keeps in touch with that applicant and that new hire, because honestly, employees are not really going to be as they're not gonna wanna impress HR as much as they're gonna wanna impress their directors. So that increases the level of accountability from the beginning, and that director is more in touch with them from the beginning. So that has helped in certain circumstances to take, instead of here HR, you hire the person and you get them here on the first day, there's a level of engagement with our directors and those applicants and new hires. We're doing on day one offers, so they come in, if we like them, we make them an offer before they leave. And then get everything scheduled. That way they have everything, it's instant gratification. I mean, they come in, they interview, they have the same day offer, and then we schedule them for their drug screen and their new hire meeting so that we don't have to do as much. I rarely use a telephone anymore. It's all texting. I mean.
Excellent. I mean, no, those
Those are good.
yeah. No, those are great. I mean, that's great input, because I think the less time that you can let pass between
Yes.
initial contact, because people are just, I mean, first of all, there are so many opportunities out there that, if somebody's quicker than you, or they drag less between interviews and between initial contact, then there's a better chance of you hanging on to them. I really like the texting, and they're really making and I guess managers, they understand there's a shortage, an employee
Right.
crisis. And so really investing the managers in the hiring process and making them a critical part of that, and making them encouraging them to be as responsive as possible, as quick as possible, will probably help with some of the people that are falling off the vine there, because that's really what's happening. They may be interested, and they may reach out or respond to an ad or an Indeed post or whatever, or go to your website, but if you don't hit them quickly, and it's kind of like fishing, if you're fishing, if you get the bite and you don't hit the pull back, then they're going to go find something else to eat. And that's really, I mean, that's a very simplistic analogy, but it's really kind of what's going on out there, is they'll nibble around until they find something that they really chomp down on, and then, if you can keep them on the line all the way up to the boat, then, you've really, it's really you got to be really focused on every aspect of the recruiting process, much more so than in the past.
Sure.
Yeah.
And you have to have a collaborative approach. You have to get your directors and managers involved. It's not a HR does it all and we see them on the first day of orientation anymore. I mean, that's the hardest part, to get the buy-in, is you're adding directors one more task that they've got to do every day, and you got to get them on board. And the ones that are on board, they're getting the people in, and the ones that are not, they're not. So.
That's some of the best input I've heard in a long time on this whole issue, is just really engaging your team from the first, ad all the way up through getting them in the door, getting the drug testing, the background check, whatever you do, getting all of that done, completed, without letting them out of your sight or out of your grasp, if you can avoid that, just because it's that, it's that fluid of a situation. And so that's great input, Allison.
Something we do at the Heart Association, we have an ambassador program of employees, and it's a lot of social media, but we even do, like, we had incentives. If you share a post and a picture of you and what you love about your job, you went into a drawing for a $50 gift card. It just encouraged more participation so we have an ambassador ERG that meets monthly, and we basically just try to talk about fun things that we're doing on social media. So I think it's worked. And also, I'm curious, more as an employee of an organization, if anybody does referral stipends, because they used to do that when I first started working at the Heart Association, and it kind of went away. I'm one who's still going to tell my friends about a job opportunity, but it might encourage others to do that more, and kind of like you're saying with directors, but more of like employees encouraging their friends to come and work.
I will tell you, we have a $5,000 recruitment incentive to recruit your friend for a med-surg and ED employee. So if you are an employee of the hospital, you don't have to be a nurse, but if you're an employee of the hospital and you recruit a full-time nurse, then you get $5,000 and they get $3,000 coming in.
Holy cow, yeah. No,
Can I get a job?
I know.
So,
Those are, and I will be honest, We have some people that are taking advantage of it, but
Not as much as
I mean,
you
you
think.
can make $40,000. I mean,
Getting employees in.
very easily. I mean, you recruit 8 of your friends to come to work, it's $40,000. But
That's, wow. No,
it's
that's a
huge.
pretty
But that's the
generous-
lengths
yeah.
that we're having to
That's-
go to, and it's not necessarily as fruitful as you would want it to be.
Involving your employees in the process of promoting the employment environment at your company, whether it's through social media or just other forms of outreach, and promoting the organization as well as the benefits or, you know, the good parts about working there. You know, that's a great strategy, and it's something that you know, can be very effective. And as Allison was talking about, just they're having to be very aggressive in offering referral bonuses to existing employees, which is always something that I recommend, because a lot of times you'll get your better candidates through existing employees, but referral bonuses for existing employees, and then even sign-on bonuses for the people that they're bringing. So the hospital has obviously had to really dig deep into those, because those are some of the larger referral bonuses and signing bonuses that I hear about. But I guess in the medical business, it's so competitive that you guys are having to do that to compete with Birmingham and Atlanta and all the other places. But, you know, and of course, we won't even talk about truck drivers. I mean, finding truck drivers is probably the hardest of all the categories from everything I've been told. It might be right up there with medical anyway. And, you know, the large companies are now offering signing bonuses, bring your dog with you on the trip, you know, guaranteed nights at home, you know, all kinds of extra bonuses, large signing bonuses. And so whatever they can do to get people in. But I realize some businesses are not able to do that, and maybe you're a smaller business and you've got 10 employees or 5 employees, and you need 2 more to work in the warehouse or whatever, and you can't go out and pay a large signing bonus. You know, what are you doing, and how are you, you know, finding these people? I mean, because it is hard, and I don't know, you know, what I think the personal touch is probably the most important thing, is just finding people that you can get in the door, and then establishing relationships as quick as possible, and not letting them out of your reach. But what about some of the other organizations? Anybody else have any input on the whole hiring piece, and maybe what you're doing that you found to be effective?
Carol Gillen, I'm with Craft in East Gadsden. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Carol.
We build plastic parts for the automotive industry. So we're a little different than some of the other groups here. But we actually offer an incentive bonus for our operators. And we also offer that to the new employees that come in. If they can run more than one machine, we have a monetary amount attached to that. So that's perks and benefits. We also do a referral bonus as well. For the current employees will refer some of their friends to come in, and they get a monetary amount, plus the person that referred gets to after a period of time. But those have actually worked. We just don't have the funds to do the amounts that probably would attract better, you know.
Yeah, well, hey, so Carol, are you guys able to find the people that you need using these incentives and all that, or are you still having a hard time finding people?
Well, we're having, it's finally picking up a little bit, the traffic, the front lobby interest. But I've been resorting to some of the temporary staffing agencies. We're using some of those. But even there, it's taking a week usually to get an order filled, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, that's tough. And I see Jason Gurley from personnel resource or personnel staffing.
Well, I'm mainly working on direct hire positions right now, but I'm still in contact with everyone else in our offices. One of the things you see is the ones that are working are moving around. Whoever's offering them a little bit more money, $1.50 more, they're just moving around. So right now it's more of a shuffle game than anything else. We still haven't seen a lot of people returning back to work yet.
Yeah, that brings up a point. I was working with a client down in Mobile this week or last week, and they were saying that they were getting them in the door, but they're losing them in the first year, generally for $1 an hour or 50 cents an hour. And so we've been working on putting together a progression plan so that not only will they have it, but that they can show an employee that's coming in, this is where you can be in 6 months, this is where you can be pay-wise in a year, this is where you can be in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. Here's how you can increase your compensation, and this is what you could be making if you stay with us. And so a lot of times, you know, and a lot of companies will say, well, we have a plan like that. And my response was, well, do the people that are coming to work for you know that plan, and do they know what it looks like, and are you selling it to them? Because you're basically in the job of marketing to your employees. Yeah, because you've got to have something that they can see beyond just that pay that they're making now and right in front of their face. They've got to be able to see down the road. A lot of people don't really think down the road very long, but if you can show them, you know, in 3 months, 6 months, a year, and then give them maybe a longer term vision, you might be able to do a better job of keeping them there. So that's a great point, Jason. Appreciate you bringing that up. And just, you know, the fact that people are moving a lot because they can. And you know, it's easy because you apply online, you can find another job and get hired on the spot without going through a whole
Without
lot.
looking anybody in the face.
Yeah, without even having to look anybody in the face, which is really bizarre. And I hate that way of hiring people. And I know you know, hiring people on the spot, you want to spend some time really getting to know them. And I know
It's also laying out that compensation plan, not here's the hourly rate or here's the annual rate. It's the full compensation
the total
plan.
compensation.
And
Yeah.
what's the total compensation benefits? What is the plan for moving up, and is it written down, and what's the rules to get there, so that at least
No,
they
that's a
can
great
see
point.
it.
That's a great point. Dale, if you didn't hear, Dale was saying not only selling the compensation, the hourly rate or whatever, the salary rate and what you could be making down the road, but also selling the whole total compensation plan of the benefits and all the other, the vacation and everything that comes with it, and showing the value of that. Because a lot of people will lure somebody away for 50 cents an hour, but yet they don't offer, you know, a good comprehensive benefits plan, or their health insurance is, you know, got a huge deductible and high rates, and so all of those kinds of things. Yeah, so that's some great input, and I mean, we could talk about this, I mean, because it's such an issue, and maybe we need to just, again, devote a session to nothing but this issue at a later point, because, I mean, everywhere I go is what I hear. But I want to talk about the marijuana issue while we've got Tay here. We've got Tay Phillips from Ogletree Deacons in Birmingham, who was kind enough to join us today. And Tay and I've met a couple of years ago, and Tay has been heavily immersed in the marijuana, recreational medical marijuana issue around the country from a legal perspective. And as I said, he's a partner in Ogletree Deacons and has just become a real authority in the marijuana area. And Tay, I won't ask you, put you on the spot, and you can plead the fifth or whatever on how far your experience with that goes, but I would like for you to maybe, if you wouldn't mind, take a few minutes and let's talk about marijuana in the country, and then about the new legislation that has been passed here in Alabama and what you see as the impact on employers.
A little bit of personal and professional experience. Hypothetically, perhaps maybe in a more juvenile stage of my life, I may have hypothetically utilized some substances. So there's a little bit of personal experience. But then, in all seriousness, from a professional standpoint, I was involved with this topic 5 or 6 years ago when marijuana laws started to become a little bit more prevalent and started to become a little bit more employee friendly. And I tell folks all the time, and you know, this audience is probably new to this, and this is probably the first time you've had to deal with marijuana issues in the workplace. And as of January 1, 2022, it'll be the first time you'll actually have to deal with this issue when there is a law on the books that governs you. But this is a topic that moves very quickly. It's a topic that is way more complicated than you probably think it is. It is a topic that tends to evolve as the months and years go by, and it's a topic that's still fairly fairly young and fairly new on the employment scene. And so it's something that you'll want to know a little bit about, not only from an Alabama-centric standpoint, but I think it's also useful for you to know how this topic works and how it has been working across the country, because it does tend to be more broad than you think it is. And we'll talk about the Alabama law in a second, while the law currently might be employer friendly, and it probably is, it could very well change as the years go by. And I think it is very useful for you to understand how this topic has started to work nationally, because it'll help you to understand it locally as well. Well, I think you made it to where I could share my screen. I'm going to try and do this. If I somehow manage to mess this up, then I'll just keep talking. Can y'all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so I tried to do this where it was a full screen, just regular presentation mode, and it was not doing what it was supposed to do. So y'all are just going to have to look at my actual PowerPoint, and you can sort of see all the slides. But I'm just going to point you in the direction of a couple of slides that you need to know about. And I'm going to move quick because we don't have enough time to talk about this in great detail. This is a topic, Mike, as you know, it always generates a ton of questions and it's very confusing. So if anybody has any follow-up questions or thoughts or would like to know more about the topic, just let me know, and I'm happy to elaborate or talk to you offline or after the meeting, because it does tend to be a little bit more broad and confusing than we can cover in 10 or 15 minutes. So let me do this. Let me first tell you, and I'll send you these slides as well if y'all want. This is a fairly comprehensive presentation that is broader than just Alabama that I've been using over the past couple of weeks, but I'll send this to anybody that wants it. First and foremost, I need everybody to understand that when you're talking about marijuana in the workplace, it is, like I said, a lot more complex, a lot broader, and a lot more confusing than you probably think it is. I think most people, a lot of my colleagues included, thinks that, oh, this is just a drug testing issue. And that is not true. Sure, drug testing and marijuana go hand in hand for obvious reasons, but it is much broader and much more far-reaching than just a drug testing issue. It is a drug testing issue. It is a workplace safety issue. It is a disability accommodation and discrimination issue. It is a legal compliance issue. In other words, you have to actually comply with the medical or recreational marijuana laws themselves. It is a issue that tends to garner a lot of legal claims and lawsuits, and those are starting to spike as this issue becomes more prevalent and employee friendly. It is an issue where you are having to juggle the correlation and interplay between federal and state laws. And it's really the only employment law topic, period, that is somewhat controversial and what I mean by that, it's where morals and the law tends to collide. So it can be a really difficult issue just because it's very widely misunderstood and oftentimes sort of cuts against how you believe, whether it's from a political or a personal or a religious or a moral standpoint. It is something that tends to conflict and tends to not make sense. So again, we don't have time to go deep into all of this, but it is a much more complicated issue than you think it is, and one that triggers a lot of different employment issues that you may not think it does. I promise you I'm going to talk about the Alabama statute in a second, but you need to know this stuff just so you can understand what I'll say in just a second. I want to clear up just a few things that are either misperceptions or things that can be a little bit misleading to folks. Number one, and most importantly, yes, marijuana is still a Schedule I controlled substance, which means that it is quote unquote illegal under federal law. That really does not mean anything at all when it comes to complying with state marijuana laws. All right. So a lot of employers think that, well, marijuana is illegal under federal law, so that means we don't have to adhere to or comply with any of these state marijuana legalization laws. And that's just not true. First and foremost, there's been a lot of courts, not in Alabama, but certainly in all these other jurisdictions across the country, that have come out and said definitively that the Controlled Substances Act is not going to supersede, or preempt is the legal word. It's not going to give employers an excuse not to comply with state marijuana laws. All right, so that's the first point. The second point, and this is something that I think employers sometimes get confused with, just because somebody is doing something illegal, i.e. smoking weed, just because they're doing something illegal does not mean that you, the employer, are doing anything illegal by employing those individuals. All right. In other words, there is no prohibition that you have as an employer, and nothing precludes you as an employer from hiring and employing people who are doing otherwise illegal things outside of the workplace. All right. Otherwise, you would have no employees, because every one of your employees, they speed, they run red lights, they roll through stop signs, they don't wear their mask properly, or they don't wear it at all sorts of things that are illegal. So just know that the illegal status of marijuana under federal law doesn't give you free rein to do whatever you want when it comes to these state marijuana legalization laws. I won't dig through all of the rest of this, because again, it can get a little bit confusing and we just don't have time to work through all this stuff. But just know that it is a topic that can be very misleading, and one that if you just read these laws, they tend to say things, but the things that they look like they say can be very misleading, and things aren't always as they seem if you're reading an actual medical marijuana or recreational marijuana law. All right, so what does the Alabama medical marijuana law say, and when does it go into effect? So it goes into effect January 1, 2022, okay? And the law itself is very, very long. Most of it has nothing to do with employment whatsoever. If you tracked these marijuana laws and you read them, you would see that they are incredibly boring, they're incredibly long, and most of the time they primarily deal with things like licensing and taxation and decriminalization and all of the different infrastructure type things you got to put in place to actually have a marijuana economy, for lack of a better word. So usually there's just maybe a page or even just a few paragraphs that actually deal with employment. And that's how the Alabama medical marijuana law is set up as well. So what does the Alabama medical marijuana law actually say, and what will the impact be on employers? First and foremost, I want you to remember that in Alabama, now this is not the case in some other states, but in Alabama, recreational marijuana is still prohibited, and there is no law that will prevent you from taking adverse action against someone who tests positive for using recreational marijuana. In other words, marijuana for non-medical purposes. So let's just get that out of the way really quickly. You can still fire or refuse to hire folks, if you want, who are using recreational marijuana. Second, and this goes for either medical or recreational marijuana, these laws never allow and never prohibit employers from taking adverse action based on on-site use, on-site possession, or on-site impairment of marijuana or under the influence of marijuana. So you cannot use marijuana in the workplace, you cannot possess marijuana in the workplace, you cannot be under the influence of marijuana in the workplace. And when I say in the workplace, that means obviously on company premises or when you're performing work on behalf of the company or anytime during work hours. So again, just to get that out of the way very quickly, you never have to allow for those types of things. All right, so what does this law actually do? I want to take a step back real quick, and I want everyone on the meeting to understand that when you are talking about medical marijuana and you are talking about potential legal claims associated with medical marijuana, you need to remember that there are two separate but related claims that could arise when you are dealing with a medical marijuana issue, okay? The first one is the one that most people can understand very easily, and that is there a potential violation of the medical marijuana law itself? So in other words, if you fired someone who tested positive for marijuana and they were a medical marijuana card holder, or if you rescinded an offer for someone who was a medical marijuana card holder, that individual, could they actually bring a claim under the medical marijuana law itself? And in Alabama, the answer to that is no. So that's this first bullet point: no employment protections for medical marijuana card holders within the Alabama medical marijuana law itself. Okay, so that is the first potential claim you have when it comes to medical marijuana card holders and medical marijuana issues. Is there a claim of the law itself? And I want to pause there just to tell you that this is not the case in Alabama, but in some other states, their medical marijuana laws actually say something along the lines of you cannot take adverse action based solely upon someone's medical marijuana card holder status. All right, there's about 15, 17 states that have that type of language. And in those states, if you did rescind an offer, or if you did terminate someone for using marijuana who were a medical marijuana card holder, you could very well run into an issue where you have a claim where someone is saying that you actually violated the law, the medical marijuana law itself. We call those anti-discrimination provisions or employment protection provisions. And like I said, sometimes those are actually within the medical marijuana laws themselves, but that is not the case in Alabama. All right, so that is a claim that you do not have to worry about in Alabama, at least for now. Now, I will pause there to say that I think that will probably be the case for a long time, considering how conservative Alabama is. But, you know, the state of Virginia, which is historically fairly conservative, they just amended their medical marijuana law as of July 1, last Thursday, to include those types of employment protections. So it's not outside the realm of possibility that at some point in time, Alabama might amend its medical marijuana law to contain employment protections. All right, but that's not something you have to worry about right now. Now, the other bucket of claims that you have to worry about, and this is one that is oftentimes forgotten, and this is the one that you probably need to worry about within Alabama, at least until a court chimes in to talk about this issue, is the possibility for a disability discrimination or a disability accommodation claim. All right, and what I mean by that is, if you are a medical marijuana card holder, okay, theoretically, air quotes, theoretically, you have some type of qualifying medical condition that authorizes you to be a medical marijuana card holder. So examples of that sometimes are things like cancer, Crohn's disease, chronic pain, HIV, list goes on and on and on. In other words, if you are a medical marijuana card holder, then you have to have some qualifying medical condition that allows you to get the card. And all of those qualifying medical conditions are going to be considered to be disabilities. All right. And so if all of those are going to be deemed to be disabilities, then you run into the possibility of a disability discrimination or a disability accommodation claim when you are dealing with medical marijuana card holders. So let me give you a real world example based upon a case that I defended in Massachusetts 6 years ago. And this was the narrative that the plaintiff presented in that case. She said, I have Crohn's disease. In order for me to treat my Crohn's disease, I have a medical marijuana card that is approved through the state of Massachusetts. I could not have gotten a medical marijuana card had it not been for the fact that I have Crohn's disease. When you pulled my job offer, you discriminated against me based upon, number one, my underlying medical condition, i.e. Crohn's disease, and number two, the way in which I treat my underlying medical condition, i.e. medical marijuana. All right. And so the same danger that that occurred in that case is now present in Alabama, and that is there a possibility for someone to bring a disability discrimination claim arising out of a medical marijuana issue? And that is the claim that you need to be worried about. That's the claim that you need to make sure that you are thinking about when you're dealing with medical marijuana card holders. And I'll tell you that despite the fact that we're talking about this sort of controversial and exotic, marijuana issue, at the end of the day, it's just a traditional disability claim. And so it's really no different than the pain pill disability claims that we had a few years ago. It's the same concept where if you have a set of bad facts and you have a somewhat liberal leaning judge, then you might find yourself having to deal with a disability discrimination claim arising out of these medical marijuana issues. Now, I won't read all of this because it's fairly repetitive, but there's a lot of employer-friendly language within the Alabama medical marijuana law. I think some of this language is pretty straightforward and self-explanatory. I think some of it is open to a little bit of interpretation as to how broad the scope may be. And we'll just have to wait until a court chimes in and talks about that. But again, this language is contained within the actual medical marijuana law. So this is all talking about potential claims or potential issues that are in the law itself and has nothing to do necessarily with a separate but related disability discrimination issue. And so again, this all sounds very good. It's all very employer friendly, but whether or not some of those concepts will bleed over into a disability claim, we just don't know yet. And the thing I've told employers is the main takeaway from this is it is probable that this issue will shake itself out to be very employer friendly, not only from a disability analysis, but also from the Alabama medical marijuana law itself. So in all likelihood, it is probable that this is going to result in a very employer friendly environment. And it's not going to be something that is much ado about nothing, but it's something that I think that once we get some court decisions, we will have a very friendly landscape for employers in handling medical marijuana issues. But what I've told every Alabama employer who I've talked to about this, there will be a test case or there will be a few test cases. And when there are those test cases, you do not want to be the one on the defendant side of those cases. You will get your name in the paper. It will be all over AL.com because you'll be the first case or the first handful of cases to deal with medical marijuana issues. I think most people probably don't care about marijuana and certainly don't care about medical marijuana. So I think you might somewhat be a little bit villainized in the media if you happen to be one of these test cases. So again, be careful with this issue. Think through this issue when you have medical marijuana issues that arise, and don't think that you have just complete and total free reign to do whatever you want, because the reality is you do have to think about and work through the disability accommodation and disability discrimination analysis, because if you don't, you could trigger a claim that could be expensive to defend, could result in some bad PR, and we were talking about difficulty in recruiting and retention. There might be people who just don't want to go to the employer who was picking on the poor person with Crohn's disease who was just trying to use their marijuana gummy to feel better. So, the main takeaway, like I said, is think about this from a very careful point of view and remember that disability accommodation and discrimination is an issue that you'll need to think through when this medical marijuana law goes into effect.
Wow. So Tay, what's an employer to do? I mean, you got an employee that has the Crohn's disease and they come to you and say, I've got the prescription. They're a great employee and I've got to take it. I'm going to take it. I'll try not to come to work impaired or under the influence. I'll take it at night, but I still need to take it. And there could be some spillover. So what's the conservative course to keep from being that test case?
If you're trying to find the path of least legal risk, Mike, and I'm not saying that your operational folks are going to go for this and your EHS people may not go for this, but if you're looking for the path of least legal risk, one of your options would be just to completely eliminate pre-employment and random testing for marijuana altogether. Now, I'm not endorsing taking out things like cocaine, heroin, other illegal substances, But a lot of employers are starting to move towards eliminating pre-employment marijuana testing and random marijuana testing, especially for non-safety sensitive jobs. Now, I think there is a little bit more inclination and business reason to keep those types of testing protocols in place for the safety sensitive jobs. But, you know, probably 30-ish% of employers are starting to move away from testing in those circumstances for non-safety sensitive jobs. I would always encourage employers to keep up their reasonable suspicion testing and keep up their post-accident testing, again, to try and foster a safe workplace. But, you know, if you were to come to me and say, hey, would you care if we eliminated pre-employment marijuana testing? I would say no. I mean, that's fine. You know, again, it's the path of least legal risk. It might not be something that your operational or safety people will sign off on, but that is one option to prevent having to deal with these hard questions. Now, I will say another option available if you do want to keep with the testing, but you want to take a least risky path. When you have a positive medical marijuana test, go through the disability accommodation analysis and figure out whether you can or cannot accommodate the individual. And basically what you're trying to figure out is you're trying to figure out if you can accommodate them failing a test and you letting them work anyway. Now, that's the real reason and the real accommodation you're looking for. The written accommodation would actually be thinking about whether or not you could accommodate the underlying medical condition and the way in which they treat their condition. But as you're working through that analysis, it would be just like any other traditional disability accommodation analysis where you are working with a healthcare provider, putting them on the spot and asking them whether or not the person's going to be impaired, asking whether the person uses their marijuana at or near work hours, asking them whether or not they would need to use or be in possession of marijuana in the workplace, and basically focusing all of the disability accommodation inquiries around the concept of safety, and then taking those responses and looking at it through the lens of the person's job description, their work environment. In other words, are they doing safety sensitive duties and responsibilities? Are they working in some type of environment that's a little bit more safety centric in nature, like confined space or working at heights or things like that? And then figuring out whether or not you can accommodate the possibility of impairment in the workplace. And I think that if you go through that analysis and you come to the conclusion that you cannot accommodate, then at least you can avoid someone making a claim and saying that you didn't even try to accommodate them. Now, that doesn't mean necessarily that you'll completely avoid a claim being filed, but at least you could then say, hey, we tried to accommodate, we showed our work here, we've done our homework, and this is why we could not accommodate it. And so at least you create a favorable narrative for yourself. But if you go through that analysis and you figure out, hey, look, we don't really mind, we can accommodate the person, then that's fine. And that's obviously something that you can do. If you did decide to accommodate somebody's positive test and allow them to continue to work notwithstanding a positive test, I would encourage you to, you know, put some restrictions on them and say, you know, we're allowing you to keep working, but you can't come to work high, you can't use in the workplace, you can't possess in the workplace. And, you know, depending on the person's job, you may want to modify some of their job duties and responsibilities to remove some of the safety sensitive aspects of the job. But again, this is a case-by-case basis, and it's just like a traditional disability accommodation analysis where you're trying to figure out, can you accommodate? Does it make sense? Is it creating an undue burden? You know, all of the typical questions you ask yourself when you're working through ADA issues, you're just thinking of it within the lens of a somewhat controversial substance in marijuana. So I know that's a very long-winded answer, Mike, but the two things that employers can do to minimize their risks, number one is they could consider taking testing out for marijuana in certain circumstances, and two, going through a full disability accommodation analysis when positive tests arise. Now, I'll tell you the third option is just you know, let people work. And again, that might be something that the operational folks and the safety folks and the management of your company may be steadfastly against. And that's fine, but that's another option that would keep you out of trouble, is just let them do whatever they want. I'm not necessarily endorsing that. I don't think that a lot of safety folks would endorse that. And I suspect that the folks in Alabama will be a little bit more risk averse and conservative on this issue than others. You know, when I say that to an audience in the Northeast or the West Coast, they don't care. But you say that to an audience in the Southeast, and it tends to make their hair stand up, because they just cannot even fathom the thought of letting people test positive for any type of substance to keep working. And that's fine. You know, the Alabama law is written in a fairly employer-centric fashion, but you know, it ultimately comes down to an operational issue. So again, if I was to tell employers one thing on this, I would tell them, figure this out first. What do you want to do? In other words, what do you ideally want your stance and want your company culture to be when it comes to medical marijuana? Do you want to be more liberal? Do you want to be more conservative? Do you want to be somewhere in between? And then you can figure out a policy or a protocol working backwards to see how you can achieve that goal. But that's where you need to start. You need to figure out, what do we want to do? And you've got about 6 months to figure that out. What do we want to do, and how do we need to put the motion or the wheels in motion to accomplish what we want to do? And that may entail modifying your written drug testing policies. It might entail doing some supervisor and manager training to talk about how to spot impairment and how to document impairment in the workplace. It might entail, talking to your drug testing vendor and figuring out if you want to pull marijuana off the testing panel. These are all things to think about in the next 6 months, because once the law goes into effect, it's going to be kind of hard to do this stuff on the fly. So I would encourage everybody to figure out what you want to do and then work backwards. Like I said, you have the flexibility to try and achieve your company's goals on this issue. You just may have to be a little bit creative in trying to figure out how you're going to do that.
Wow. Yeah. No, that opens up a whole, we could, again, talk about that for a long time. Now, Tate, I'm going to have to ask you, because I know that was one of the big issues you had in the case up in, was it Massachusetts or Maine?
Yeah, Massachusetts.
Well, so Alabama doesn't have its own disability law. And so if you're looking at disability issues, you're looking under the Americans with Disabilities Act. So what do you think will be the interpretation, or what are the issues there with whether that applies to this Alabama medical marijuana usage?
This is a much more dangerous issue when you have the presence of a state disability discrimination law, for a couple of reasons. One, state law judges, as y'all probably know, can be a lot more plaintiff friendly than federal court judges. And you are dealing with a state disability law and a state marijuana law. So the state judges tend to be a little bit more protective of their state laws. You know what, my best guess is that I think that one of our fine federal judges in Alabama will probably say that the Americans with Disabilities Act does not require an employer to accommodate current illegal drug use. And I think that they will probably, in my opinion, frankly, incorrectly rely upon the Controlled Substances Act and marijuana's presence as a Schedule I controlled substance. They will say that marijuana is illegal under federal law, and the ADA does not require us to accommodate current illegal drug use. I think that's what most of our federal court judges will probably say. There is a little bit of precedent for them to rely on with that issue, where some other federal courts have chimed in and at times have said that exact thing. And I think that most of the federal judges are fairly conservative in Alabama, and I think most of them would be likely to follow that precedent. So even though I lectured everybody at the beginning of this not to rely on marijuana as a legal status, I think that there is room for a judge to use that in an ADA case.
But you don't want to be the test case, right?
Well, yeah, there's that, and there's also the fact that that's where we get into the individual facts and the individual circumstances of a particular case. And I think that's a general foundational concept that a lot of judges would use. But there could be factual scenarios or circumstances where that doesn't really apply. So, you know, I guess my thought would be that's something that I would expect our judges to say. But again, these facts can be so case specific and so so dependent upon what HR people or supervisors say or do, that there could be a set of facts that would not trigger that type of analysis. So that's a very long way of saying that I think that the federal judges will probably use that as the potential to knock out an accommodation claim under the ADA. But again, if you landed on the desk of somebody like Myron Thompson or you know, some of our other more liberal judges, there's the possibility that they don't do that. So I don't know. My guess is that they'll probably use that as a way to get rid of an ADA case, but there could be a bad set of facts that would prevent that from being something that could apply. So again, this goes back to I'm not sure, and somebody's going to be a test case, and we're probably just going to have to wait 6 to 12 months after this law is passed to figure out how courts are actually going to deal with it. And look, if I was a plaintiff's lawyer, what I would do is I would write a complaint that doesn't mention medical marijuana at all, not one time in the complaint. And yes, it might have been the reason why my plaintiff got fired or had their job offer rescinded, but I would not mention medical marijuana at all and focus solely on the underlying medical condition and solely on just a treatment for for a medical condition. And if you don't mention marijuana, then I think that argument with respect to current illegal drug use, it somewhat goes away and it keeps a lawsuit alive. And, you know, I know we have one other lawyer on the call and some of you who have been involved in lawsuits. This is an issue where you're not so much worried about whether or not you can win a case, whether it be at summary judgment or a trial. You're trying to eliminate the case at an early stage of the litigation. If you cannot do that, then you've sort of lost anyway, right? Because you have to defend the case. You have to go through the motions of defending the case. Again, the PR remains throughout the course of the litigation. And so if we're thinking about the goal of eliminating a lawsuit immediately after it is filed, I'm not sure if you're going to be able to do that if a savvy plaintiff's lawyer writes this in the, you know, a little bit more savvy manner to avoid that type of court decision.
There's a pretty good chance there'll be somebody like that out there, I would imagine. So, well, it sounds like it's going to be an interesting year, certainly on that front. And you're right, now's the time with 6 months left to kind of decide what your company's position is going to be on it. And if you need to make those changes, go ahead and get them in place and be ready to go. Because, like I said, you know, you got the time now, and it's going to be scurrying around later on. I want to thank you again for joining us. Really appreciate your time and you know, your lending your expertise and you know, the experience that you've had there. And I want to say that we really appreciate everybody joining us, and hopefully we can continue to be discussing these kind of timely, topical issues and being able to offer solutions and being able to at least identify, you know, the issues so that people will know where to look for solutions and where they need to look for solutions. But really appreciate everyone's participation. Appreciate Meg and Knowles and Sullivan sponsoring the HR Council, and hopefully, like I said, that all of you will come back for future meetings and that we can really start making this a vibrant and active council that really makes an impact on the local employment community. So thanks again, everyone, for joining. Thanks for the Chamber, for Will and the Chamber, and John, all of you for putting this on.